Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Former Action Guys podcast. Summer's almost here. Perfect timing for custom t-shirts and gear for reunions, barbecues, or your next unit event. You can visit jcramergraphics.com now to grab popular items like shirts, hoodies, and hats to support the show. Doing a group order, reach out and I'll send you a discount code so everyone orders individually. Skip the hassle of organizing money, sizes, and colors. I've been there. It's no fun. Always remember free shipping on orders over $75. Need a custom design? Just let us know. We've got your back. Again, visit jcramergraphics.com. Thanks for the support, and let's get to the show. Blayne, thanks for coming on the show. West Point guy, you were armor guy, special forces, did a deployment to Iraq, deployment to Afghanistan. Really sounds like a really interesting career, but I want to start with, you were recruited to go to West Point. Unlike a lot of people who are really trying to get into West Point, they actually came to you.
Yeah, sort of. So I had a chemistry teacher in high school, and he was also my golf coach. So I played golf in high school. And he was a retired Army officer. Mm-hmm. So he had done 20 or so years in the Army and then retired and got into teaching. And he was really all over me about putting in a packet to try to go to West Point or the Air Force Academy or something. And I'm not exactly sure how it transpired, but at some point the golf coach at West Point got a hold of my name and you know, saw some stuff about me playing golf down in Florida and then started recruiting me pretty heavily from that angle. So, you know, academically, physically, otherwise, I was kind of on par with the rest of my West Point classmates. Yeah. But I had a little bit of a side door in that the golf coach wanted me. And so that, you know, at least piqued my interest and kind of started me down that road.
How good of a golfer do you have to, I don't really play golf. I've only played a handful of times. How good of a golfer do you have to be to qualify or to like get recruited by D1 schools?
So it depends. There's a wide range of D1 schools, and I'm not really up to speed on it now. I will tell you that the kids going to West Point to play now are very good. They are much better than we were when we went there. I don't mind saying it. These kids are shooting, you know, around par. Like they'll break par sometimes, a few shots over par. These are very good players that are going to these schools now.
That's such a. I had a friend in high school who was a really good golfer. He actually hit a hole-in-one while we were in high school, and it was in the like local paper and stuff. It was a pretty big deal. And that was like my first, like, oh wow, it's okay, it's a big deal, you know. Like I didn't, and he never followed through on it. And it was one of those things where I don't know. Golf is super interesting, and it's like one of those. I think you really have to be into it. You know, the few times I've gone, I'm very casual. It was with buddies. We were going out to crack some beers and, you know, play golf on base, which, you know, a lot of bases have really nice golf courses. And I remember we had a guy behind us who was super serious about golf. And it was it was just not – he wasn't behind us. He got attached to us because there were three of us, and so they gave him us – or they attached us for a foursome. And it was just – I don't know. I was out having fun, and when you're playing with people that are really serious about it, it's just – I don't know. It's just a different vibe, you know?
Yeah, so I barely play anymore. I still love the game, and I would love to play more, but just life doesn't really allow for it anymore. But it's definitely one of those rabbit holes that can become all-encompassing that people get completely obsessed with. You see it in other stuff, too, triathlon or mountain biking. I mean, pick your poison. There are things that people just go crazy about. I would suspect that anybody who's not that great at one of those things but takes it super seriously probably takes themselves too seriously, if I'm guessing, but yeah, maybe not.
Yeah, you never know. Now, when you're at West Point, how does that tell us how West Point, well, let's start with going to West Point. How did it start for you? And then kind of tell us about the training that you do there, but also how the sports, you know, how you work around that with the, you know, hardcoreness of being at West Point.
Sure. So I wasn't sure I wanted to go at first. The golf coach was recruiting me, and I was kind of looking at every other possibility besides going there. I kind of thought of it as a bit of a last resort, but I really wanted to go to Duke or Virginia, or I thought about maybe going to the University of Florida or somewhere close to home. But the truth of the matter is, there was really nowhere else I could go that I was going to be able to go to a great academic institution, play Division I golf, and be able to afford it. Like it kind of shook out as the best option. And so candidly, that's the way I was thinking about it, was where can I go get a fantastic education at the right price and have a chance to play golf at the next level? And West Point became the best option for me. And so I kind of, not begrudgingly, but somewhat hesitantly kind of crossed the line and completed my application and got signed up. And I tried to be somewhat prepared. I was running and getting into the gym and stuff in high school, but I didn't really know much about the military or what I was getting into. So, you know, I sort of showed up and it was a bit of a smack in the face, which I think it is for most everybody, because knowing about it and doing it are definitely two different things. But I was a very competitive kid, real high drive, took a lot of pride in what I did. And so once I kind of walked through the doors and started, I was pretty much locked in and committed to doing my best and trying to get through it. And for a little while, that's kind of what it was for me. It was just sort of try to survive and get through it, which again, I think is a pretty normal thing. I was not an exceptional cadet, in my early years. Eventually, I settled in a little bit and kind of found my groove, and I realized what was a realistic expectation for me and how to do a little better academically. And I made some friends. And so, the last year and a half maybe was a pretty good experience. I had a lot of fun. Knew I was probably going to make it. It was still hard, but I could sort of manage a little better. Mm-hmm. The golf thing was an interesting wrinkle in that it was kind of a double-edged sword. I certainly would not have wanted to do West Point without it, because on one side, I got to leave post a lot. Like, I got to go on a lot of trips and go to other colleges and meet other people and stay in hotels and just get out of, especially those first couple of years. I got to get away and live a little bit of a more normal life for a few days at a time, which was awesome. But on the other side, it definitely made things harder in terms of academics because I was missing some class. And at West Point, there's no such thing as a makeup. It's called a make-ahead. So if there's a test on Friday and you're leaving on Thursday afternoon to go on a golf trip, you're taking that test on Thursday, not on Monday when you get back. Mm. So it was hard, but it was really good for me because it forced me to be very organized and diligent with the way I spent my time, which I don't think I was especially good at as a high school kid. I was just sort of like, yeah, it'll be fine. I just crammed everything into my locker and didn't think too much about it. Yeah. But, I really had to learn those skills as a cadet, and I think that's definitely served me well.
What was your major while you were there?
I was an economics major.
Interesting.
I thought when I showed up I would study like mechanical engineering or something.
Yeah, that's pretty
I was
common.
Sort of math inclined. Yeah, and what you learn pretty quickly is that hardcore engineering is very hard. Mm-hmm. Being in like an electrical or mechanical engineer is a very, very difficult route. There's a joke that electrical engineering, EE, stands for eventually economics, because you get sort of down the road and you're like, whoa.
It's all math,
so
right?
I realized that. Yeah, exactly. So I realized that I was okay at math and science, but I liked the humanities, and I felt like economics was kind of a happy medium there.
Okay. Yeah, that's an interesting one, because most people I talk to are like engineering students, or I had one history. I think I knew one guy that was a history major as well, which seems like what an interesting place to study history, right? When there's so much history that has occurred there. So many historic people have walked those hallways and have been part of that organization. I know your dad was in the Army, but for a little bit, and you guys didn't really talk about it a lot. So my dad was in the Army, and growing up, like, I remember him deploying to the Gulf War, and so I was all about the Army. I knew about West Point. Like, as a little kid, I was like, that'd be so cool to go to West Point. It's just such an opportunity, very different than the traditional college experience, I would say, I would assume.
Yes.
But what an opportunity. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the history that what's it like to walk through that much, like, history? I mean, I know I keep saying that, but it's just hard I'm fascinated with it.
Yeah, it certainly makes an impression upon you. I mean, they do their best to indoctrinate you and really ram that stuff down your throat in terms of understanding the West Point heritage items and the history of the place and the Army. And again, you do it at first because you just have to memorize this knowledge and spout it off at formation while people are yelling at you. But you do get to a point, I think everybody probably gets to a point, and maybe it's only when they go back later, that you are awestruck by the people who have walked in those hallways and sat in those chairs and what they've gone on to do in their lives after West Point. And it's a beautiful place for the most part, and with these huge gray granite buildings, and it's on the Hudson River, and it really does have just a way about it that you almost can't help but feel kind of swept up in, and the pageantry and the football games and the uniforms. And again, you bitch and complain about all this stuff when you're there, but I think you also know in the back of your head, like, this is pretty cool, like, this is special. And there's also, I think, a sense of pride amongst a lot of cadets knowing that while they're not down at the University of Florida having an awesome time, that the joke really isn't on them. Maybe the joke's on everybody else because they're meeting these tremendous people and getting this amazing education. So it's overall an incredibly positive place to be. It's not perfect, but I think you do get a glimpse into something really special while you're there.
Now, one last question on that. I mean, when you were recruited, did you still have to get a nomination from someone from Congress, or there's like a list of people you can get nominated by, or does all those hurdles kind of go away?
No, I had to do all the stuff, and that's an interesting thing about the academies is that even if you're a tremendous athlete or the football program or whatever wants you still gotta be able to hack it academically and physically and otherwise. So I had to do all the same stuff as anybody and go to the interviews and write all the essays and go get my physical exams and take a physical fitness test and all that stuff.
Now, a lot of the academies, you look at like the Naval Academy, people are getting out and they want to become ship drivers. One day they want to, drive carriers. The Air Force Academy, people are getting out and almost all of them are pilots that are getting out of there. Is there something when you come out of West Point that everyone's trying to get to, or is it kind of just spread out because there's so many different jobs?
I think it's pretty spread out, and I think the other academies are probably more that way than you might imagine in terms of the range of jobs that you can and people do. One of the best sort of little recruiting nuggets that I ever was handed was when I was on my recruiting trip to West Point. Somebody pulled me aside and said, the Navy has their boats and the Air Force has their planes, but here in the Army we have people. And so if you really care about people, if you really want to get good at leading people, this is where you should go. And it wasn't like the other academies were like fighting for my attention, but I thought that was such a powerful statement. And it really resonated with me even as like a 18-year-old kid. I was like, all right, I'm into that. I dig it.
I would have been like, that's cool, but put me in a jet. Because that's
yeah, I know, right?
Because that would be wicked. But you ended up in tanks. So how did you end up from West Point to ended up in the armor?
A couple different reasons. So one reason was during my time at West Point, at least, it may be very different now, but during my time, kind of pre 9/11, the infantry just seemed very kind of like extra hua, like almost kind of cheesy, like high and tight, like hua hua hua. And that just did not appeal to me. I'm like I'm much more of an independent, and I was much more of a laid back person. And there was something about the infantry that appealed to me. I could tell. I wanted to lead soldiers and be involved in like a maneuver branch, but I just couldn't get over the hump. I just couldn't identify with the infantry, basically. And then I was like, well, I could go armor, because armor is still a maneuver branch. People still get assigned to you, and you're still kind of in charge of what's going on, but you're just doing it, on a big mechanized vehicle. So that was part of my thought process, I guess. And then the other part was a lot of my friends were going to Fort Hood, and I knew I could pick Fort Hood if I wanted to. And I was like, well, if you're going to go to Fort Hood, you're going to be mechanized anyway. Like you'll be mechanized infantry, so you might as well get on a M1A2 tank and just go all in and do armor. So the combination of those two things, I think I was like, well, I guess I'll just go armor and go to Fort Hood. That seems like the best place to be a tank platoon leader.
Yeah. Now, when you show up in the Army, so, you probably heard recently the Marine Corps got rid of their tanks. Controversial. Some people aren't happy about that. Some people are okay with it. I remember taking tanks on deployment on ship, and it was like such a logistical nightmare. Because if you bring a tank, you got to bring a Hercules, and then you got to bring all the other stuff that's to like maintain both and everything.
Yeah, big logistical train for those things.
Yeah, I think if you become an artillery officer or a armor officer or something like that, you pseudo become a logistics officer as well, because you have to become very good at logistics planning.
Oh yeah, maintenance, all that.
Oh yeah, for sure. When you are going through your training as a new lieutenant, is it similar to like the basic armor training that enlisted guys get initially, and then you learn other stuff, or how does that work out on the officer side?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of that. So some portion of your officer basic course, which I think mine was like 4.5 or 5 months, some portion of that was just learning this vehicle, learning the weapon systems, spending time in simulators, learning how to drive them, how to be a tank commander, a loader, a gunner. You learn all the positions. You learn about the ballistics and different types of ammunition, and you learn tactics. So what are the formations tanks move in? What are the ranges of these weapon systems? Assembly and disassembly of machine guns. So you definitely get a fairly robust hands-on experience with the equipment itself. You even do a little bit of kind of basic maintenance. You spend like 10 days out in the field with just lieutenants on a tank going through a field exercise. So you got to check the oil and, do all that stuff. Bore sight the cannon, etc. You're by no means an expert at that point. You kind of just know enough to be dangerous, but you do get fairly familiar with the technical aspects of it. Mm-hmm. And then maybe the other half or more of the course is officer leadership stuff. So you practice writing operations orders and doing leadership stuff and things like that. I remember having a pretty good time and feeling reasonably well prepared to get out to the force and be a platoon leader coming out of there as much as you could be in that amount of time.
I mean, and still, this is pre 9/11, correct? This is still before 9/11.
Sort of. So 9/11 happened while I was in the Armor Officer Basic course. I graduated in June, and then 9/11 happened on September 11th. So I was 2 months, halfway, whatever, into my Armor Officer Basic course when that happened, which was an interesting sort of mindset shift
for all
of us.
Yeah, I mean, all of a sudden, this cool career opportunity and maybe something a little different turned into very realistic.
Yeah, it went from, hey, let's see how quickly we can get out, or let's start thinking about grad school, or which music festivals we're going to go to across Texas next summer, to how do I get on the next thing smoking to go get in the fight.
That's what I like. That's what I like to hear. It's not people saying, how do I get out of this deployment, or, oh, crap, oh, no, now we got to go. It's like, how do I get on that? Like, people wanting, I never understood the guys that were in the military that didn't want to deploy or were surprised when a deployment came down the pipeline. It's like, bro, what did you think you were doing? Yeah,
I mean, there are always some, and I think post 9/11 was probably the peak of, people trying to join the military, and everybody in the military wanted to go over there and get some. 5, 6, 7 years later, as things drug on a little bit, I think sentiment may have been a bit different for some people, but certainly 2001, 2, 3, pretty much everybody wanted to figure out a way to go over there and get some.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And unfortunately, I mean, the first thing going into Afghanistan was definitely not tanks. So there's probably not a deployment on your horizon, No,
that's how I ended up being an SF officer, really, is that I was watching the war on CNN from the motor pool at Fort Hood, and I was like, this is fine and all, but, these things are not going to Afghanistan. Mm-hmm. And so, what am I going to need to do to be a part of this? And so I was just kind of pestering the SF recruiters as early and often as I could, because I thought, this is probably going to be the nature of this conflict. I didn't really know that it was going to expand and go on for so long. I think at that time we all kind of felt like, in another year or two, this thing's going to be over.
Yeah.
And, then what? We will have all missed it. And it seems a little silly thinking about it now, but I don't know how you felt, but I was like, shit, I don't want to miss this. I did all this work. I went to West Point. I'm ready to go, and we're going to miss the war. This is going to be the thing of my generation, and I'm going to be sitting home.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to do that.
Yeah, I joined in. So I was a senior in high school. People that listen to the podcast a lot have heard this story, but I was a senior in high school. September 11th happened. I went to my recruiter that week. Me and a couple buddies went to the Marine recruiter that week. I ended up getting in trouble my senior year. I got arrested. I had just turned 18, and so my entry got delayed. And then my buddy I was supposed to go in on the buddy program with, we had a going away party for him, and I got in trouble again. And so I got delayed again. So I ended up joining in 2006, and it took me forever to get in. So I joined in 2006, and I remember thinking, I'm not going to go to Iraq. I'm never going to make it to the war. And then I didn't even actually get to deploy until 2009. And all the way up until that point, I was like, dude, I'm going to be one of those guys that was in during the wartime and didn't get to. I actually knew a guy who did his entire deployment or his entire enlistment and never deployed the entire time. And some guys like that get out and they feel bad. I don't know if you've spoken to any of these guys. They feel like it's like a hole in their service that they just didn't get to fill, and I feel bad for them, but at the same time, I'm like, you're lucky that your family didn't have to go through it. You don't know what could have happened while you were there. There's so many variables, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think most people would prefer to have gone, for sure. Brandon always jokes that we were like a bunch of kids that wanted ice cream. We all just ended up with cold headaches.
Yeah.
We all thought we knew what we were getting into, and for the most part, we were pretty wrong about it. But even still, I mean, I had some pretty horrific experiences in combat, and I still would rather sit here today and have gone than to have not have gone.
Yeah, no, I completely. I'm with you. I'm totally with you. But I just don't want people that didn't have that opportunity to beat themselves up about it. You know what I'm saying? It's like you didn't do anything.
Oh
wrong.
yeah, so much of it's just timing. Like it's just you don't.
The guy I knew
who would have.
The guy I knew that did 4 years. He did a workup. I was with maintenance battalion at the time. I was a mechanic when I first joined, and then I lat moved. I'm not sure if you know too much about my background. And he did a workup for a deployment. Did everything. Went on pre-deployment leave. Came back, and they were like, "Hey man, we have too many guys on the roster. You're getting cut." And I was just like, "Damn, dude," because there was too many reservists because of the way it worked. And I'm just like, it is what it is. You know, there's nothing. It's not like he did anything wrong or anything like that, but. Yeah, it's unfortunate.
Yeah, and like, look, to be very clear, I joined up in 1997 and had no intention of ever deploying or serving in combat or any of those things. So, all the people that joined after 9/11 knew what they were getting into or had some idea of it. I had no intention, nor any desire to do any of that stuff. So,
attack on the country will change your mind on something like that, right?
Yeah, like I couldn't have ever predicted that. It just happened to be the timing that worked for me.
So now you did get to deploy to Iraq, though. Before you went to SF and all that, you did deploy. You deployed with your tanks, correct?
No, so I did deploy with the 1st Cavalry Division, but by then I had moved on, and I was a scout platoon leader at the Brigade Reconnaissance Team.
Gotcha.
So I did like a year or so, a little over a year as a tank platoon leader, and then I became a scout platoon leader and went up to brigade and did scout reconnaissance stuff for the next 2 years, and that's what I was doing during my deployment.
Do you get to do any kind of special training when you go to that team, or can you explain for people that may be interested in tanks and they're not sure what you're talking about, what that is and how you transition from a tank platoon commander to that?
Sure, and it's different now, but back then, tank battalions had a scout platoon, and that scout platoon typically was Humvee based. And they were designed to move out in front of a tank battalion and do route reconnaissance, zone reconnaissance, area reconnaissance, etc., screening, things to support the maneuver of that armored element. It's this idea like if you're firing your weapon, you've done something terribly wrong, right? And so a lot of lieutenants want to be the scout platoon leader because it's kind of a cool job. You get to, do some cool guy stuff, and it's a second platoon, which is nice because you get to stay as a platoon leader longer. And so that, of course, was my goal when I got to my tank battalion, and I did everything I could to do a good job so that I could be considered for that job. And I got that job and was getting ready to start. The next day I was literally going to go to the motor pool and sign for the trucks and all the gear from the current scout platoon leader. And I got a call at my house like at 8:45 at night, and I pick up the phone, the landline phone. It says, "Hey, Blayne, it's Mike Bell, who is my battalion commander." And I was like, "Hey, sir, everything okay?" And he says, "Well, they're forming a brigade reconnaissance team. So this is just 2 scout platoons that are going to kind of be out further in front doing this mission for the whole brigade combat team. And they're kind of cobbling together people from the existing scout platoons. And I think that you do a good job in that job, and the brigade commander wants you to go take it. And I hate to lose you, but I think you should do it." And I was like, wow, first of all, it's very generous of him to do that. And I was like, oh, shoot, okay. So I actually didn't take the scout platoon at my battalion, and I went and was part of this thing called the BRT that was, again, it was 2 19-person scout platoons that were intended to be way out in front of a brigade combat team, so 3 or 4 armored battalions. And if you imagine kind of the 2003 push from Kuwait to Baghdad, these would have been the people out, clearing routes, doing zone reconnaissance, things like that. So I was super pumped to do that job, because if I couldn't be in a tank anymore and we're going to deploy to Iraq someday, like what a cool job that would be. Yeah. So I was eager to do it for sure.
Now, what kind of weapons are you guys carrying? Do you guys have like tows on these Humvees? Like, how are you doing? What tools are you using for reconnaissance? Are you just out there, sneaking and moving around?
That's a good question. So no heavy weaponry. So we're talking 240s, 50 cals, at the time Mark 19s, so the 40 millimeter grenade launchers, but no kind of anti-tank or heavy weapon systems. Later, and before we deployed to Iraq, we got a system called the LRAS-3, which is a long-range thermal reconnaissance tool. It's basically the same FLIR sight that's on the nose of an Apache helicopter.
Okay, yeah.
They're like these huge cubes. They weighed a ton, and they would mount on the bezel ring opposite the weapon on the top of a Humvee. So the gunner up on top of the Humvee could have, let's say, the 50 cal or the Mark 19, and then could spin the bezel ring around and could look through this tremendous thermal sight. So if you got up on some high ground or you're out in the high desert or somewhere, you could see like sometimes 10 or 15 kilometers, depending on your vantage point, and see a thermal picture or image of a vehicle or people. And so those ended up being incredible tools for us when we were downrange, because we could sit behind a berm or something, throw a little camo net over that, and then you could look a long way in the flat kind of deserts or farmland of Iraq, and you could see, you know, if somebody was digging around in a palm grove or trying to put an IED at an intersection and things like that. So that was the best technological tool we had by far.
Yeah, that's kind of what I expected, something like that. I think we started, by the time I got to Afghanistan in 2011, and then again in 2013, we had like a mast-mounted camera similar to what you're talking. It's like on a gimbal that would mount to the back of the vehicle, and you could sit on the inside and run the camera. And we'd use it to, like, you could raise it up. You could use it to, like, look into a compound wall before you went in, or you're just, like, you know, like you said, scoping stuff out if you're up on a high ground, kind of looking around. Very, you know, very handy to identify where people are at, what's going on and everything. And also, we were kind of trying to use them to not only find IED and placers, but, you know, signatures for IEDs, you know, trying to find those tripwires, trying to find those, using the thermals to find the hot or cold spots in the roads. I assume you guys are doing the same thing, because this was 2004, correct?
Right, 2004. And so we were doing very much the same thing. We were assigned to kind of the rural area between, west of Baghdad, kind of between Baghdad and Fallujah.
Okay.
Like north of Abu Ghraib, if you're familiar with kind of the Iraq landscape. And at the time, early 2004, it was sort of just lawless out there. Mm-hmm. The big units had gone in and occupied these different kind of sections of the city in Baghdad, or maybe they were in Fallujah or Ramadi. But there was really nobody paying much attention to these big swaths of rural area that lay between the cities. And what was happening out there was tons of weapons caches going on, a lot of kind of planning, movement of materials, IED, making facilities, things like that. And our boss, Colonel Formica, the brigade commander, said, you got to get out there and see if you can disrupt this, because they had set up these improvised like rocket and mortar launchers. Mm-hmm. And they're just lobbing rockets and mortars onto the airport and into the green zone, into these various neighborhoods of Baghdad. And there was kind of nothing anybody could do to stop them, because they were simple kind of hit and run things. You know, by the time you realize what's going on, no Q-36 or 37 radar or counter battery thing. There wasn't really a way to get after them without going out on foot or on wheels and actually disrupting their decision cycle by running snap checkpoints, trying to identify weapons caches, you know, chasing some of these people down with the help of some helicopters to try to disrupt all this kind of weapons movement, IED, mortar, rocket activity. Mm-hmm. And so that's really what we did almost the entire time I was there, was kind of that mission.
I mean, and you did over 200 of those patrols, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was, and for people who have been deployed to Iraq in that time frame, you know what it was like. You just kind of went out every night. You know, we would come back at, you know, whatever it was, 1 or 2 in the morning, and maybe get midnight chow if we were lucky. That was always the best. You come back in and midnight chow is still going on. Mm-hmm. And then you go to bed. You know, most of the guys would sleep through breakfast. And then, you know, maybe 11 o'clock in the morning, we'd have an op board, start doing PCIs, doing our checks, getting things loaded up. And then, you know, sometime that afternoon, that evening, you roll back out and do it all over again. And just do that, you know, day after day after day.
Were you guys there for a year?
Yeah, so my unit, I wasn't there for a year. What happened is we got to October or so, and I got a slot to go to SF selection in November. Mm. And we were scheduled to deploy back before Christmas in December. And so my command let me go home a little early so that I could hit this SF selection date that started right before Thanksgiving, like November 22nd or something. So I push back. Mm-hmm. And while I'm at SF selection, my unit gets extended. The old classic, your 12 months just turned into 15 kind of deal.
Yeah.
So my unit, all my guys ended up getting moved from our original spot, and instead of coming home in December, came home in like March. So I felt kind of shitty about it, to be honest, because I intended to miss, the last 20 or 30 days of the deployment, which is kind of like wrap up, pack shit up kind of thing, and ended up missing like over 3 months of the combat deployment that my guys were on. But I spent a month of it at SF Selection, and then started getting my stuff ready to go on to the next thing.
I've always said it's crazy how the Army deployed guys like that, 12 months at a time, 15 months. Like that's insane. The Marine Corps, I'm so happy that their deployments are around were during that time, 7 months. If you were with the higher headquarters, like the regimental command or the division command, you were there for a year, but no 15 months, nothing like that. I mean, that's just, and the other thing too is you come back from that, you're home for a little while, a lot of those guys, especially in the early days, and then you're back over. Some of these units, it's just insane the amount of work that they did to those guys. I don't know. I always thought that was kind of messed up how much time they made some of those dudes spend in country. And I understand how you feel, because no one wants to leave their dudes behind. And then you find out they get extended. You're probably like, man, I'm a scumbag, but
yeah,
it is what it is. Right?
It's a crappy feeling. It was bananas back then. I mean, the number of folks that were getting extended, and there were people that they had flown home to their base in Germany and then saw their families for a couple days, and then had to get back on planes and go back over to do another 3 months. I mean, what the military was doing, the Army specifically, was doing to soldiers and families back then. And I know it was stressful, and I know the senior leadership were having to try to make lemonade out of lemons, but it is almost inhuman what some of those folks had to do. I mean, I know guys, you might too, that had to do 2 15-month deployments with maybe a year or less dwell time in between. Or, they were over there for 15 months and they got assigned to a military advisor team and were home for 6 months and had to go over for another year.
Yeah.
And that is devastating. I don't know how and people were, but it's just crazy to think people could be effective at that kind of op tempo.
Well, not only effective, but I think you can be effective, but you also are at what cost? At the cost of your family,
great.
Personal relationships,
yes,
because for someone that's outside of it, it may be hard to understand, but when you're in it and you have these deployments coming up, sometimes you don't care. Sometimes you're looking forward to it because it's better than being in garrison. At least you're out doing your job, but you look forward to it. And it's almost selfish. Because some of this is we do some of this to ourselves, right? If you re-enlisted, you knew what you were re-enlisting for, and you can't complain about deployments after that because you knew what you were doing. So we do it to ourselves. It still sucks, but it's, when you're in it, you kind of want to go. I wanted to deploy. I wanted to be the guy that they were like, this guy's ready to go all the time. He would go, he's ready to have his hands. Because to me, in my mind, I'm like, that's how you get to do the cool stuff. If you're always willing to go out and do the work and you do a good job and people know your name and that you do well, then your opportunities are going to present themselves that normally you wouldn't get. And that was kind of my mindset. And it's destructive to families. No, the Marine Corps never, someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think the Marine Corps ever did any 15-month deployments or anything like that. That is crazy. That's just not cool, so did you guys, on any of these missions, did you have anything interesting happen? Observation, as a guy that was a forward observer and a JTAC, I know how that can go. It can be sitting in a spot and staring at nothing for many hours at a time. You get to know everyone around you. You learn stuff about people you probably would never learn. But it can be quite boring. So how was it for you guys doing actual real missions?
Yeah, it was both. I think like a lot of people's deployments, it was long periods of intense boredom marked occasionally by intense periods of violence and excitement and exhilaration. So we spent countless hours sitting on an OP, looking at an NAI, hanging out for 4, 5, 6 hours, doing traffic control points, looking at cars, waving people through, getting nothing, occasionally going out and trying to hit some kind of target that we think is something and it's a dry hole. There's a lot of that. Mm-hmm. But there were plenty of times where, an IED would go off and you're responding and reacting to contact, or we got ambushed one time out near a palm grove and got in a full on intense back and forth firefight. Calling in close air support, the whole thing. I think my patrol, I might get it a little wrong. I think we probably had 7 or 8 IED strikes on a patrol that I was leading during my time there, which candidly is not a super high number compared to what a lot of people experienced, but we were mostly traveling in the middle of the night, driving really fast, like doing everything we could to mitigate IED strikes, but we still had a number of them. We got a chance to work alongside some SF guys while we were there, which was super cool. So we got a chance to do some hits and recover some caches and do some relatively low intensity stuff by their standards, but was really cool for us. We did surveillance over high IED kind of emplacement. We supported a couple of big brigade level offensive operations because we were there in 04, and so you think there was April of 04 was the huge Shia uprising where it was like war in the streets.
Yep.
And there was Najaf and Fallujah. So there was a lot going on in terms of legitimate complex military operations that we would go out and provide surveillance on targets and things like that. So it was tons and tons of boredom, a lot of 7 Degrees of Kevin Bacon and movie trivia and stuff that I'll always remember fondly.
Yeah.
And just general grab assing, but there was also plenty of stuff. And one of the missions we did, I don't talk about this much, but this is probably worth mentioning. One of the things we did was EOD escort. So we had 2 platoons in the BRT, and the way it worked for a lot of the time I was there was one platoon would go out on mission at night and the other platoon would be on standby for EOD. And if in Iraq in 04 in Baghdad, there was IEDs and stuff going on pretty much every night. So you kind of flip-flopped. One night you would go out and do reconnaissance surveillance, things like that. And the next night you would go out and do EOD escort. And the stuff that we saw and witnessed doing EOD escort was bananas, because you're going up to a suspected or a real IED, often multiple times per day, per night, pulling security at a site where an IED was just in place or discovered, so it's probably under surveillance. You're shitting your pants because you think someone's going to ambush you or the thing's going to go off, and you're just waiting there for the robot to put a charge on it and blow the thing up. Get
a bip.
We were out and had VBIDs go off and some pretty wild stuff doing the EOD escort, and we saw some pretty ugly scenes. As a part of that as well.
Oh, I imagine. Especially if you're going out to do what do they call it, where they do a site survey after an IED has gone off to kind of try to figure out how big it was and all that stuff, Yeah.
Yeah, there's some just weird... That was the interesting thing about being deployed. I mean, there were a lot of interesting things about it, but one of the things that always struck me was you become exposed to so many things that you just kind of think you're never going to see in your life, or you've read about or heard about, but you just don't really think you're going to experience them. It's almost like when you're a little kid, you're 3 or 4 years old, car accidents are a thing, but you've never been in one. And so you just kind of think they're things that happen to other people. And then, I don't know what age most people are, 4, 5, 6, 10 years old. They become involved in their first car accident. And you're like, whoa, that's a real thing. That happened to me right there.
Yeah.
I remember that as a kid. And I feel like my first deployment was a lot like that, in that it was just sort of every few weeks there was something would happen where you're like, I can't believe I just saw that. Holy shit, a tank just ran over a car, a bomb just went off in a guy's hands. It's wild. And, over 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, you're just dang, the world is different than I thought it was.
The world is much different. That's another thing we talk about on the show all the time is the reality of Americans is very narrow in a lot of ways. They're you don't understand what's going on in a lot of these countries, and you don't have to be in Iraq to experience this. A lot of third world countries, if you will, are these areas that have militias and gangs and stuff, and these crazy things happen because there's pseudo combat happening all the time, even if there's no declared war kind of deal. It's such a weird world out there, man.
It really is. I mean, we have a very narrow perspective living here in the comfort of the good old US of A. And, I think sadly, so many Americans just take that blissfully for granted. and we have our problems and our warts, and we've got stuff we've really got to work on here. I'm deadly serious about that. I believe that to be true. But if you travel much and you just see how other people live in some other parts of the world, and it's astonishing just how different most of the world is from the lives that you and I are leading most days.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And, what you mentioned that you got to see all these other kind of things too. An interesting thing about a job like yours, where you're not necessarily like attached to one unit and doing the same kind of missions every day with the same people, you're being attached to other people, is that you get this like new appreciation for other aspects of the military. Like, I'm sure when you went out with EOD, you're like, wow, like I'm sure some of the stuff they were doing was outside of what you understood. You're like, holy crap, I didn't realize they did this. Or like, it's just, I enjoyed being a forward observer and a JTAC, and the fact that I got to work with air wing guys, talking planning and obviously working on the radios and stuff. I worked with obviously artillery guys, talking planning, doing missions and stuff like that. I worked with infantry guys, got to go out on missions, got to go out on patrols. I was a mechanic, so I was in logistics. So I'm very appreciative of all the like experiences that I got to have and understanding of. I was always interested while I was in the military. When I met someone new from a job that maybe I hadn't really interacted with, I'm like, tell me about your job, man. Like, what do you guys actually do? Because I actually want to know, it's because there's so many jobs out there that people don't realize what's going on in the military. It's mind blowing.
Yeah, and I think being open-minded to that is really important, by the way, especially if you're a leader, because this idea of operating as combined arms or a joint force or whatever, like that's not a joke. That's real. Like you really need to do that to be effective. And one of the most frustrating things I saw during my time, especially in my deployment to Iraq, was you'd see these units that would be kind of operating in their own little battle space. They've got a neighborhood or two neighborhoods maybe of Baghdad, and it's like they're fighting their own little war. And as working for the brigade reconnaissance team and moving around and working for different battalion commanders and kind of seeing a little bit broader battle space, I would just be like, what are you guys doing? You know that these people are moving across your little, dry erase marker lines on your imagery map there. Like, they don't care about that stuff. They don't know what that route's called. They're just living their lives and doing their thing and trying to disrupt the occupation here. We're going to have to open our eyes and realize this is a much more complex fight than we're giving it credit for. And if you're an infantry guy and you think that's all that's important, all we need is the infantry, like you're just out of your mind. You're just not paying attention to what's really going on.
Well, that, and if you treat it like it's a exercise, like a thought exercise or something like that, you know what I'm saying? Like your being there is in a vacuum. Like we're doing that, like you said, this is my own battle space. This is my vacuum. I don't care. I'm blinded to everything around me. That's a horrible way to go. I will say I really appreciated the Marine Corps is very much about combined arms. And that was obviously beaten into my head as a forward observer and stuff like that. Combined arms, you don't have, it's just, everything should be combined arms. We're supporting infantry we're supporting movement by fire, and if we're going to move, we're going to use fire in some way, somehow. And I think that forces people to think outside of their own MOS and when you're thinking that more bigger picture. We also did a really good job of implementing op boxes is what we called them, operation boxes, where if I'm next to this battalion and I see someone on my side and they're creeping into their side, I can call them up and they would open up what we called an op box, meaning that now that area I have control of. I can drop ordnance there, they're fine with that. So yeah, you have to be flexible. Being rigid like that in combat is just not a good idea, Rob.
Yeah, and I don't want to speak ill of anybody. I think everybody was doing their best, but seeing some of that rigidity and some of the, this is my battle space kind of stuff, it's like, this is a war. This isn't your anything. Like, we are all in this,
Well, that mentality went big picture too, right? I mean, we did 21-year wars. We didn't do a 20-year war. We did 21-year wars because new battalion commanders are coming in, new regimental commanders are coming in, new division commanders are coming in, and now it's like, okay, well, I'm the new guy on deck. Here's how we're going to do the war now. And it's like things would change consistently, but what never changed was no one ever told you what the end state was. So, it was a big mess.
Yeah, very frustrating. Very frustrating. That's another reason why I really wanted to get into SF. I was like, I'm not interested in coming back here and conducting movement to IED for another year. Like, we've got to be doing... I remember thinking, and again, I was young and arrogant, but I was like, is anybody interested in winning the war?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what would you say we do here? Are we trying to win this thing, or what's the goal? Like, how are we measuring progress? Are we doing anything to meaningfully try to wrap this thing up and achieve victory? Or is it just, let's do our 12 months and try to hope our numbers were better than the last 12 months, and then we could make that an OER bullet and we're good to go?
I get my award and we're good. No, that's exactly what it is. Another thing I think too, and maybe I'm being a little hard, but I think some of these senior officers didn't want the war to end until they got their deployment in. You know what I'm saying? I think some of these guys were like, hey, I got to get mine before, like, we can't wrap this up until, because you don't want to be, the guy that didn't get to deploy, like we talked about earlier, right? So I don't know. It was, a whole thing was a mess. I remember before I deployed in 2000, I think it was my 2011 deployment, bin Laden had just been killed. And my mom called me and was like, do you still have to go to Afghanistan since he's dead? And I'm like, yes.
Yeah, we got it, right?
I'm like, yeah, Mom. Like, that's not even part of the war anymore. It's crazy. But it is what it is. Now, so you said you wanted to get to SF. You mentioned you talked to a recruiter before the deployment. Were you still working this process while you're deployed? Because, I mean, people may think you're out living in a hole the whole time, but military functions still happen. Administrative actions still occur. So were you working this during the deployment?
I wasn't really working it. I got my packet ready and had submitted it before our deployment. Mm-hmm. And so that's the way it works for officers in SF, or at least did then, was you have to submit a packet. And you fill out all this stuff and you give it to them. And then they decide if they're going to pick you up and offer you a chance to go to SF selection. So just because you apply doesn't mean you're even going to get a chance to go and try out, basically.
Yeah.
So I had submitted my packet. And then at some point during my deployment, halfway through or something like that, I got... I think just some orders handed to me, probably, because the internet didn't really work. I think I just got handed a manila envelope with some orders that said, you can take whatever it is, TDY, to go to Special Forces Assessment and Selection, and you need to go on one of these 5 dates, kind of like whatever it was, like July through March or something like that. And I just looked at it and I was like, okay, I got to make a decision. And I probably just went to the S1 and was like, what do I need to do here? And they were like, well, you could go to like one of the 2 slots available when we get back from the deployment, which it turns out I probably would have missed them both because I would have been extended. Or, you can try to go to one of these, ones that are late in the year, and then you got to talk to the boss. So that's basically what I did. I just took my orders to the brigade commander. I think actually I had to talk to the deputy commander first because he tried to talk me out of going. He was like, you don't want to go do that. Like, you're doing great here. Don't go. Why do you want to go be a glorified squad leader, as he called it? And I'm like, I've worked with these guys a little bit since we've been here, and they're pretty good at what they do. So then I had to go talk to the big boss, to the brigade commander, and basically ask his permission to say, like, hey, this is important to me. I really want to go. These are my options. Will you release me to go? And he wasn't crazy about it either, but he signed off on it and let me go to selection.
That's awesome that he signed off on it, because he doesn't have to, I mean...
No, he didn't.
But what would he have on his hands had he not? Then he'd have a disgruntled lieutenant that's now mad that, probably doesn't want to be there. So that's...
Yeah, maybe. Maybe. I like to think I wouldn't have been disgruntled, but like I probably wouldn't have been eager to come back and work for him again.
Yeah. Now, when you're, as an officer, it seems like... So it's probably harder to get into selection as an officer, correct?
I mean, maybe a little bit. There is that kind of packet process that I don't think necessarily exists on the enlisted side.
Do you have a minimum time that you have to serve before you can apply as an officer?
Yeah, that's kind of the thing. So you've got to do at least, 3 years on active duty before you can even go. You have to be a first lieutenant promotable. So you have to be basically a captain, an 03, in order to go to selection and move on.
Okay. And then let's talk about the selection process and you going through it. I mean... From my understanding, there's no difference between the officers and enlisted going through. You guys kind of all lose rank at that point, right? When you're going through that together?
Yeah, more or less. There's very little difference. Yeah, there were a couple extra things that they sneak in there for the officer candidates because there's some other things they're kind of evaluating you for. But more or less, it's the same. You show up, you wear blank BDUs with some white engineer tape with your roster number on it, and you don't really know what's going on. You just kind of follow orders. They write something on the whiteboard. You show up in formation. You do whatever they tell you to do. You can't wear a watch. There's no agenda. You don't know what's coming next. which makes a lot of people crazy. I mean, it's hard physically, but I think the thing that really gets people is the fact that you show up on day one and it's 24 days, but you're not really sure what any day is going to look like or in what sequence you're going to see things, or you don't know how well you're doing. You're not really getting any feedback, so you don't know if you're doing a good job, bad job, where you rank. And I think that makes a lot of people kind of nuts. I had just gotten home from a long deployment, so I was like, whatever, I'll just do my thing and everyone will leave me alone. It's kind of nice. That was an advantage for me, for sure.
You think it was an advantage going right in from a deployment?
Yeah, I do, because for a couple reasons. One was, even though I was hustling when I was over deployed, I was also pretty dedicated to my training regimen. And so there was nothing else to do. So even if you're working 10, 12 hours a day on patrol, there's really nothing else to do the rest of your time. So you get a little bit of sleep, eat a little bit of chow, and every day I had an hour or so where I could either go to the gym, go for a run, go for a ruck. So I had a really regimented preparation and no distractions. So I was ready to go physically when I showed up. And the other thing was I just had been a platoon leader for all that time, and I felt like I had the weight of the world on my shoulders. And at SFAS, it's a almost completely independent effort. And I was like, well, this is kind of miserable, but I'm only in charge of myself. That just felt like a huge relief. And I just didn't think mentally it was nearly as difficult as probably a lot of people perceived it, because I was just kind of like, oh, this is pretty straightforward. I'll just do what they tell me to do and
what a concept.
Do my best. That's really all they're asking, is that you just roll with the punches, do as you're told, always do your best, don't get discouraged. Ultimately you do have to run sort of fast and ruck sort of fast and keep up with PT and find your points on land nav. Like, there are things you need to do. You need to be a good teammate during the team week when you're carrying telephone poles all day long and stuff like that. But that's really kind of it. And they're just assessing you along the way for those basic characteristics of coachability and teachability and physical fitness and ability to work on a team. And again, for the officers, there's a couple other kind of like psychological little tests they run you through. There's one little scenario-based exercise we had to do that sort of tested us, like it was almost like a morals, ethics, kind of decision-making exercise. Yeah, it was, because they wanted to see like how do you manage making a difficult decision in a morally ambiguous environment? Because a lot of being an SF officer involves that, depending on what your mission set is. Like, it's not all squeaky clean out there.
Yeah.
There's an awful lot of gray, and you've got to be somewhat comfortable operating with some shady characters, and maybe you have to look past some behavior that you're not a fan of in service of the greater mission. Like, they want to know that you are not just a black and white thinker, I think, is really what they're testing you for.
Yeah. No, yeah, I understand what you're talking about. I mean, when you start traditional SF, I mean, you're out working with like tribal people and stuff like that have different. They don't, like you said before, about understanding lines on the map. They don't care about lines on maps that are made by people. Their tribe has lived in this area for this long. This is their area, and this is what they call it. And you have to they may have beef with the tribe next to them, and now you're kind of in the middle, and you got to play, for sure. Yeah. I know exactly what you're talking about. Good times. Now, when you were in Iraq still, and you said you worked with the SF guys, did you ever mention to them that you were thinking about selection and try to get some advice from those guys?
I did a little bit, but I didn't want to be like annoying or a fanboy or whatever. Yeah. So because I'm sure it would have been fine, but it's one of those things where, like, sometimes as an SF guy, you run into lots of people who are interested in SF or we're going to go SF, and it's a little bit like,
I was going to join the military.
Yeah, just put your packet in. You know what I mean? If you're interested in it, like, definitely try out. But I had a chance to work with some guys from the 5th Special Forces group, and not a ton, but a little bit. We got to go on a handful of operations with them, and they would sometimes drop off target packets and stuff that they were too busy to do. And I just got to see them move. I got to see them interact with senior officers, and I got to see them interact with like intelligence sources. And I couldn't help but notice when we would do operations with them, there was a much higher likelihood that we actually got what we were going for. The target might actually be there that night, or those weapons might actually be buried at that grid coordinate that they handed us. And I just thought they were effective, I think, is really what it came down to. I was like, oh, these dudes are really trying to get some stuff done. They are not spinning their wheels or wasting their time or trying to pad their NCOER stats. These dudes are getting some real stuff done, and they didn't care about any of the fluff. They were all about being effective, and I liked that a great deal.
Yeah. Now, following SFAS, you normally go through. Is Robin Sage part of SFAS, or do you call that? Do you call that a separate event?
It's separate. It's like kind of toward the very end of the qualification course.
Okay, so now you move through SFAS and then into the Q course?
Kind of. So I went first to the infantry officer advanced course, or I think they call it the captain's career course or something like that now. So I went to Fort Benning and I did better part of 6 months in basically the captain's course for infantry officers. That's kind of a prerequisite. If you're going to get promoted to captain and go on to take command, you've got to do this career course at some place, whether it's armor or infantry or whatever your branch is, field artillery. So I went to the infantry captain's career course at Benning for about 6 months right after selection or shortly thereafter. Mm-hmm. And then I PCS'd to Fort Bragg and started all the process of the qualification course.
Okay. Because I'm more familiar with the enlisted guys going through, because they do the selection and then they go through their own, Bravo program, different Charlie, whatever. So you guys do you go through a different course, or you go through how does that work? Maybe I'm a little confused.
So a lot of it is the same. It's almost as if being an officer is its own MOS. So, and this has changed several times over the years, and I'm not sure exactly what it looks like now, but basically you start the Q course with we used to call it phase 2 or small unit tactics. So you do, I don't know what it was, 6, 7 weeks, 8 weeks it's kind of like Ranger School. Mm-hmm. You go out and you learn basic infantry patrolling, squad movement, platoon movement, raid, ambush, recon, etc. They just kind of beat the crap out of you. You live in tin cans, you write operations orders, you go out, you do kind of basic infantry tactics, small unit tactics stuff. And everyone goes and does that together. And it's basically the same for everybody. Again, if you're an officer, different things are expected of you. They're evaluating you a bit differently. You might be in charge a little more, have to write orders and things like that. But you're all in it together, essentially. Mm-hmm. And then once you finish that, I actually went straight to SEER school after that. SEER school used to be at the very end, and they've put it different places at different times. But I went to SEER school for a few weeks, and then you do your MOS course. So the weapons guys go to the weapons course, the commo guys go to the commo course, the engineers, the medics, and then the officers. And so then and all those courses are a little bit different length. So I think weapons and engineers are basically the same. The signal course was a little longer, and then the medical course was like twice as long. Yeah. It was like over a year just for that portion. And then the officer course was kind of the same. And so you go for 3 or 4 months, whatever it is, through the 18 Alpha course, where you're learning. That was a really cool course. So you're learning a little bit about each of the different MOSs. So you spend time learning weapons, communications, medicine, demolitions, etc. You learn a lot about sort of tactics, leadership, planning, that kind of thing. But you also learn a ton about kind of joint, interagency, intelligence operations, different things. Mm. So you may be the senior person on the ground, way out in the middle of nowhere, or maybe operating out of an embassy or something. And so there's a whole other set of skills you need to learn, and there's a whole range of things you need to become aware of within kind of the SOF IC space to know where you fit. So like, where does an SF team fit in the grand scheme of this intelligence collection and prosecution process? Where does an SF team fit if you're operating in and around an embassy, running a joint exercise with the host nation force? What are the skills associated with being effective at collecting human intelligence? Like, what are you allowed to do and what are you not allowed to do in that environment, And it was really cool. It was then that I realized, SEER school was phenomenal as well. It was also miserable, but like the level of training you get there and the realistic nature of it was just mind-blowing. Like, I can't believe this is actually an Army course. This is crazy. But the 18 Alpha course was the one that really opened my eyes into what I was about to get myself into. And it really solidified my desire to be an SF officer, because I was like, this is as cool or cooler than I thought it was going to be. There's so much stuff going on here that like people don't really talk about or know about. And like, I can't believe that we're going to get a chance to do this. It was really a cool course.
I imagine, correct me if I'm wrong, but I imagine you guys get to go over like case studies of guys, that held your job before, and ways they did it right, ways they did it wrong. And I'm sure some of these other people don't know about, and they're more on the more classified side. Is that true? Do you guys go over stuff like that? And if you did, how did that kind of affect your thinking about? Was there anything so significant it changed your thinking of like, I thought we were doing this, but we're actually, this is, the real mission.
A little bit, yes. So you definitely do some case studies. That's a good point. You look at kind of these historical cases. You also do a lot of fictional scenarios. So there's this whole kind of like catalog of fictional scenarios they've got. So you do a lot of role playing in fictional scenarios where you're planning an operation to infiltrate, across the border of this country where you're ostensibly doing this thing, but you're going to conduct an infiltration across the border into this other country where we have some other interests that we want to look at and talk to, etc. How do you go about doing that? How do you establish contacts? How do you make infill? How do you operate? How do you exfil? All that. What are the political sensitivities? Who are the rival factions on the ground? How do they react to one another? It's a lot of stuff to consider. And that's, again, where the light bulb sort of went off. And I was like, oh, there's a lot of cool SF stuff that happens, let's call it above the line. But there's also some pretty cool SF stuff that could happen below the line. Mm-hmm. And getting into that world, you realize that. And you're like, man, this is, we're not just going to be stormtroopers. Like, there's some pretty sensitive and cool stuff that we may be asked to be in charge of. And it's a pretty serious responsibility when you realize, being an SF officer, there are no other grown-ups. By and large, it's just you. No one's coming. There's no one to answer to in many cases. Like, you and your team, you're the grown-ups. Mm-hmm. You have to decide, how are we going to allocate these resources? What are we going to do in this situation? And there are some people that really love that, and there are others who don't. And I think that's what the selection and qualification process is trying to do, to ensure that you're the kind of person who kind of wants the ball in their hands when things get a little ambiguous, rather than someone who's going to be phoning back to headquarters all the time asking for clarification.
No, 100%. I mean, it's such a liberating feeling to get a little bit of like control over over your own reality. You know what I'm saying? I mean, even this is nowhere near the same level, but even while I was in the Marine Corps and I went from being at 10th Marines, which is a traditional artillery unit in the Marine Corps, to Anglico, which does a little bit different stuff. They do more tailored to fire support and also supporting elements that are not Marine Corps. And there's a real big focus on these small teams. And being a team chief there, it was like, hey, what ranges do we want to set up? Yeah, there's plenty of amp. But like, there was just like, what? We can go and it was the first time an officer was like, what do you want to do? Like, what ranges do you want to set up? We can do whatever, And I was like, I've never been in a unit where they're like, let's come up with some cool training. Let's think of something, as long as it has good training value, obviously. But you get to come up with these like ways of doing things, and no one's really, as long as you're fulfilling the mission, hire is like, cool, keep doing your thing. Your guys are all not getting in trouble. You guys are fulfilling your mission. Like, and it's such a freeing feeling whereas when you're in a unit where someone's over your shoulder all the time and it's more overbearing, you don't have the flexibility to make a snap decision that may be good for your guys or your team or your unit, because you don't have that authority. I mean, you know what I'm saying? Like, I that had to have been, especially as an officer, that must have been like, wow. As a junior officer coming into being like a captain, that must have been like a wow feeling. Like, I can't believe I'm giving this much responsibility.
Dude, it was the best. It was the best. I mean, being a team leader and being able to, like you said, set up ranges, set up training. I remember one time my platoon sergeant and I put together a proposal to go do a 10-day, I think it was a 10-day training package up at another base in Virginia. And we put together a POI, and here's what we want to train on. Here's what we're going to do each day. And we're going to, do some reconnaissance surveillance. We're going to do some range time, blah, blah, blah. And it got approved. And so, you draw ammo and load trucks, and you go up there and you've got to set your stuff up at the ammo supply point and occupy the barracks and do all that. But then no one came. No one was checking on us. It was just, 10 of us or 12 of us up there for 10 days. We could have been screwing off the whole time, drinking beer and chasing girls for all anyone knew. But, we trained our butts off, and it was so much fun. And that's how teams really get close, is you go on little training missions like that, and you go out and you run an iteration during the day at the shoot house or whatever, and then you go back and you refit and you go run it again at night. And if it wasn't good, you run it again, and you're out there till 2 or 3 in the morning. And that's the kind of stuff that builds confidence, because you're like, we're not screwing around here. Mm-hmm. We're serious. We're going to go down range. We're going to get in fights, and we're not here to screw off. And, maybe on Friday night we'll go out and we'll go to the bar and hang out for a bit. That's cool too. But if you can't do that and perform at a very high level tomorrow morning when we're running, then that's not cool. It's just being able to be a grown-up and then you extend that out into, longer training deployments or then actual combat deployments. It's amazing.
It's professionalism. It's treating each other as a professional, and it's also understanding your role. And you, like you said, you have to know we're going to work hard and we're going to play hard. And if you can't play hard, like you said, you can't go out and have some drinks and stuff and still be able to go tomorrow, then maybe you shouldn't be doing the drinking part. Maybe you cut that. And if you're a professional, you understand that and you step back from that. You know what I'm saying? That way you maintain your ability in your job. Because in a role like that, when you're talking working small teams, especially when you're working small teams in places where you're not going to get any support, no one can be a liability. Everybody has to be good. Everybody has to trust each other. It's just, that's the nature of the game at that point.
Absolutely. That was another thing I really liked about that, is that even the officer has to be very, very proficient physically, tactically, technically, radios, crypto, fires, demolitions, all that. And I really, really liked that because, you're a platoon leader in the Army. You could maybe get away with, just not really knowing that much about some of those finer points. And you could do a year as a platoon leader and your NCOs and your guys pick you up and they know how to do all that stuff, and obviously really great leaders learn those skills, but on an SF team, it's not an option. I mean, you're just 12 people. You're just, in many ways, another shooter. And sure, you probably shouldn't be the first guy through the door every single time because you're going to need to be on the radio and coordinate things and do other stuff. But you have to have a very, very high level of proficiency because if you're flowing through a target and you're the first guy at the next door, you have to pull that charge out of your pocket and put it on that door and initiate that charge and go through just as well as any other guy on your team. And I really, really liked that. Again, it's maybe not for everybody, but I loved being in an environment where, look, there's nowhere to hide. There's no one coming to save us. Every single dude on this team has to be as good as we can possibly be. And it's a fun environment to be in. It's competitive. It can certainly grind you down if you're not well made for it. But I think, for people like SF guys, that's where they want to be.
Yeah.
They don't want to be anywhere else.
Yeah, I mean, given the alternative, hey, you can go to the 101st Airborne or something like that. I'm pretty sure most guys would rather stay at Special Forces. What's interesting about Special Forces too is that, like you talked about in your officer school that you're going over all the different jobs, kind of learning a little bit. Wave tops, I'm sure, about everything, and it's not just the officer that does that, though, because once your team is actually formed, you guys kind of expect each other to cross-train, learn each other's skills and stuff like that, because someone could go down at any point. Someone's got to pick up the slack, correct?
100%. That's a big part of what a team does. If you're not in a formal training workup or you're not deployed, the expectation is that you're cross-training. I mean, it's physical training and cross-training are kind of the two things any team can and should be doing if they're not otherwise assigned to something more formal. So it's, or the basics maybe. So it's small unit tactics and range time, proficiency with weapons and physical fitness. And then it's, the commo guys should be teaching everyone a class on how to set up these various radios, how to fill crypto, what to do if it dumps, things like that. And the weapons guys should be making sure everyone's proficient in these weapon systems, the new thermal sight, foreign weapons, etc. Lots of medical training. I mean, it just makes sense. And so, yeah, by the time you get downrange, by the time you've been on a team a while, every bubba on the team should be pretty good at least the kind of the base level of those jobs.
Yeah. Which SF group did you go to? Third group. And what's the language for that one? And did you do that language training?
So not really. So I studied Arabic at language school, which I really never used because we went to Afghanistan where nobody would speak Arabic to you, even if they could.
It'd be weird if someone spoke to you in Arabic. You'd be like, hey, who's this guy?
Which is why they wouldn't, even if they could.
Yeah.
Like if they were like a devout Muslim and they were educated and they could speak some Arabic because they wanted to read the Quran or whatever, they wouldn't speak Arabic to you because they were terrified that you would think they were like a Saudi or a foreign fighter or something like that, right? So French was the other big one a lot of people learned because third group has a traditional orientation to Africa. So there's a lot of French-speaking people in like northern and western Africa. So those are the big ones.
Did you keep up with French at all, or any? Do you try to maintain your language proficiency at all?
No, it's right in the dumpster, dude. I was good at Arabic when I was in school. I got a 2.2 in Arabic, which meant I was good enough to get paid. So my whole time in SF, I got paid whatever it was, like $130 a month or something.
Nice.
For maintaining my language proficiency. So I was way better at it than I needed to be in order to kind of get by and get through. But once I got out of the Army and didn't use it very much, it's kind of like a parlor trick now. If you want me to like write your name in Arabic, or if someone has like a charm necklace on that's written in Arabic, I might be able to make it out or whatever.
I learned some Pashto.
My proficiency's gone.
I learned some Pashto before going over as an Afghan advisor in 2013, and I know none of that now. I mean, yeah, it just goes away from me for sure.
It's hard.
Well, okay, so let's talk about once you get to your group. Once you're there, you finish your schooling and stuff like that. How does that look for a new officer coming into the group? And then talk to us about your first team and then kind of a work up to your deployment.
Sure. So it really depends a lot on timing, I think. So you could show up and your team could be getting ready to punch out and go on a deployment, in which case you have very little time to kind of get to know your team and get ready to go. I had kind of the opposite experience as I showed up at third group just as my battalion was getting back from a deployment. So I was kind of getting into like a long kind of prep and red cycle, which in some ways was a real blessing, and I'm glad it went that way. At first, I wasn't super pumped about that because I was like, I just spent 2 years in the Q course. It's been a long time since I've deployed. I'm kind of ready to go. Mm-hmm. But it gave me the opportunity, and a lot of guys on my team, we had a bit of turnover because the team had just come back. So probably half of us were newer to the team. It gave us a chance to kind of create the kind of team cohesion that you would want and you would need, I think, to be effective together. It gave us a chance to build kind of a new personality and culture of the team. And we had a chance to do a ton of training. So over the next year or two, several guys in my team went to several schools. We had guys go to sapper school, ranger school. We had a bunch of guys, like 6 or 7 guys went to sniper school. We had a guy go to Sephardic. The whole team went to the Special Forces Advanced Urban Combat course twice in that time. So like my capability as a team leader in urban combat and like CQB went from like a brand new college quarterback that just shows up at the NFL and the game's moving very fast to someone who's been in the league 4 or 5 years and now the game slows down. That's the analogy I would always use. So it was great. We got a chance to go do like a 6 or 7 week course for some guys from a 3-letter agency up in Virginia that were getting ready to like form a small unit that was going to go overseas and do extraditions and things like that. So it's cool, like interagency thing that we had to plan and execute the entire thing with basically no support. It was awesome. We also got together at somebody's pool at their condo on Friday nights and drank beer and threw each other's kids in the pool and stuff. It was everything I think you would want it to be.
Yeah.
I went to Blackwater and shot guns and smashed cars and got to drive real fast and shoot concealed pistol. And I mean, it was just everything I ever wanted it to be for a couple of years there as we prepped for our next deployment. Literally, we were, man. We PT'd every morning like crazy. Most afternoons, at least half, if not most afternoons, we'd go to the gym at 3 o'clock, 3:30 and lift weights. We were doing what you'd think SF guys would do, shooting lots of rounds, doing lots of PT, having a lot of fun, being pretty serious because we knew, what was coming.
Yeah.
And we had a blast. I think we all really liked and respected each other. We spent a ton of time together outside of work. In that respect, I would say it was very much like what the movies or what people would think being a special operator is like. It was close-knit, work hard, play hard, families knew each other. I mean, it was really, really cool.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, I think that would be such a better way to go than jumping on a team right before you deploy. Especially as an officer, man, I would hate to be on a small team like that and a brand new officer shows up right before we're getting ready to deploy, and we've been training and we all know each other, and we can react to each other without saying anything, and now this new guy showing up, it's going to be like, oh man, is he ready?
Yeah. Kind
of deal. Not saying that you weren't or anything, but you know what I'm talking about.
Oh yeah, it's a tough gig, man. So my buddy Sean, he was the officer that got to the unit before me. Mm-hmm. So I was the next one to come in after him. And I had orders to go to Ranger School when I finished the Q course, which is a whole nother silly story. And I was like, I don't know if I should go because my unit's deployed. So I called up the battalion downrange. And I said, hey, I know you guys have fairly recently deployed, or you're 2 months into the deployment or whatever. Do you want me just to come meet the unit downrange so I can get this deployment? And secretly, I was like, I would much rather go to Afghanistan and get a few months of deployment under my belt, even if it's working at the task force headquarters, talking on the radio, than go, carry a rucksack in Ranger School for 2 months and learn very little. And the battalion commander said, no, you got orders? Go ahead. Go to Ranger School. We'll see when you get back. And I was like...
The beating continues.
Yeah, so I just finished the Q course, and I go off to Ranger School. And then by the time I finish Ranger School, the unit's kind of coming back from the deployment. And my buddy Sean, he had gone straight over. And he took a team. The commander of the dive team of 325 had gotten hit with an RPG and was seriously wounded. And so he's out. He's medevaced out. Sean gets sent over from the States, goes right out to the fire base and meets this team on the ground in the middle of a deployment. Their previous team leader had just gotten hit and was medevaced. He hadn't been to dive school yet. You want to talk about a tough assignment. Yeah. That dude shows up day one right into the breach. And where they were in Afghanistan was not a walk in the park. I mean, they were going to be duking it out for the next few months. And he ended up, his guys loved him. He was a tremendous officer and he had that kind of SF officer capability where he could just make friends and make it work. Yeah, he was humble, but also very capable, just a tremendous dude. But not many people could do that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the big thing is show up and show that you're an asset. And I know, especially as an officer, it's like, we know you got grand ideas and stuff, but... Yeah. This is what's been working on the ground. This is what's going on. And there's so many cases of people trying to like warn or give information to someone, especially during changeover, like, hey, this area is sketchy. Don't go over here. And then the new guys are like, okay, we're going over there. And then they get fucked up. It's something like that where you're like, hey, man, just kind of come in and move with the flow of what we're doing, but don't try to that's definitely tough. It'd be easier if you're a junior guy. You just show up and do what you're supposed to do. But when you're showing up as the officer, now, you're pseudo in charge at this point, and you're doing, it's a weird situation for sure.
Yeah, you're fully in charge, which is worth pointing out. Like UCMJ, you are responsible for everything that happens, and you just showed up. So I'm not an apologist for officers by any stretch of the imagination, but I do find it funny that everyone thinks it's such an easy job and they've got
no way.
A lot of things to say about it. But when you conceptualize that exact scenario, like who wants to do that? That's incredibly difficult.
Yeah. I had when I was a sergeant, one of my majors asked me if I'd ever considered going to OCS to become an officer. And I was like, no way. I was like, dude, or I didn't say dude. I was like, sir, you guys get fired for nothing. I was like... Like something could happen on a range that you're not even part of. They just happen to be underneath you, and they fuck something up.
Or whatever.
Yeah, and they, you could be a team leader, or not a team leader, but like a section leader, and be at a meeting somewhere, and your guys are off doing a range somewhere, and something happens, and because something happened, you're the officer, you're gonna get canned for it because you should have trained them better to know better. It was just stuff like that where I was like, nah. I don't think so. I think I like it here on the east side. I would now, having done 12 years and then gotten out, I would recommend to a lot of people in the Marine Corps specifically, if you enjoy your job and you're going to stay in, really look at the warrant officer program for whatever your MOS job is, because you get some of the benefits of being an officer while also getting some of the benefits of being enlisted. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah.
And that's not, I will say, one of my first battalion commanders was a warrant officer that got frocked to be a captain and then moved all the way up to lieutenant colonel, as a frocked dude. And I wouldn't have done it as an artillery guy, because in the artillery world, forward observer, if you move from being a 0861 or 0861 to being a warrant officer, you become a targeting officer. So you're sitting in the targeting, you're doing those joint targeting cycle, and you're sitting there in the targeting cell.
Yeah.
And I was like, that doesn't sound cool. And if you're not doing that, then you're the survey guy for artillery, which, could be cool, but not really.
Yeah, warrants are big in SF. I mean, every team, the deputy commander of every team is a warrant officer. And so that's the thing a lot of guys do if they're on the enlisted side and they're kind of in between. Going the warrant route's pretty popular.
I think it's a good idea, because what are the downsides? You're getting more. You're going to get a better retirement. You're going to get again. You get some of the treatment that the officers get. Well, when Sergeant Major goes, gentlemen, you're excused. Everyone else come over here. You can be like, later, nerds. I'm out of here. Go talk to Sergeant Major.
Yep. It's a beautiful little sweet spot that those guys
for sure. But
yeah.
So All right, so your buddy did his deployment, or he went on that one, got thrown right in. You had the opposite kind of case where you guys got to kind of meld as a team. Let's talk about the at what point before your deployment do you start getting attachments? Do you not get them until you get in country? Kind of like CCTs, if those are a thing for you guys, or TCPs, things like that. EOD.
Yeah, we didn't, not really till we got there.
Okay.
We showed up and we had people that were there at the fire base that had been there a little bit before we got there, that we kind of fell in on and had to get to know. So that included our CCT. We had a special ops weather guy from the Air Force. Yep. We had 2 female nurses, I think, that were out there supporting the medical capabilities. Dog handler. We had a military dog handler from the big army. And then we had a bunch of contractors and stuff too. We had like a generator mechanic and, just a handful of other folks. So
those weird dudes that are walking around the fob. You're like, who's that guy?
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting because you've got to now somewhat seamlessly operate with these people that they're doing very important jobs for you, and you've got almost no time. And I feel very passionately about this. I think that really good teams do everything they can to get their arms around those people and make them feel as much a part of the team as they can, as fast as they can. And bad teams, kind of other those people and say, like, you're not really a team guy. And I don't know why anyone would do that, but teams do it. And it drives me crazy because, the Taliban doesn't care where these people are based out of or what their training looked like. I mean, if you're not getting those people in the loop, including them in what you're doing, making them feel comfortable and part of the team, skilling them up if you need to, rather than you don't know how to do this. That's unacceptable. Like, make sure those people are getting range time. They're getting familiarized with all the weapon systems, and they can be a functioning member of the team while you're out there, because bad stuff happens all the time. And, you need those folks desperately. So that's always been a big deal to me.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think that's the mature stance, right? Because they're there to enable you. They're called enablers. They're there to enable you to complete your mission. They're there to help you out. And when you're talking about stuff like shooting and different other aspects, you don't know what you don't know. So, like, if this guy has never been exposed to this, or no one's ever taught him this, then why would I judge him for not knowing it? Yeah, maybe it's a little funny, haha, you can't do this, but here, let's show you how to do it. So next time, we get this, especially if you're in country. Like, we're kind of beyond the part where we need to be, everyone's on the same side here, guys. We're all on the same side. That's so what you're saying is, for your enablers that you guys had, they were on their own rotations and you guys were on your own rotations. So did you get new enablers while you were there? Did you get new CCT, special, the weathermen, which is now, I think, special reconnaissance is their job now?
Right. That's a different MOS.
Yeah.
Well, sort of. They were on their own cycles. So we had some different people that worked with us at different times.
Yeah.
Some of it, though, was because of our particular circumstances. So Tim Davis, our CCT, was actually KIA about a month after we got there. And so we got another TAC P came in. Really awesome dude, Pav, came in and replaced Tim as a TAC P. Our Sauti, our weather guy, was with us for a while, and he got kind of pulled out to go do another mission with another team. So he was with us and then away and then came back for a little bit. But so he was on a bit of a different cycle. Our nurses left pretty shortly thereafter. They actually weren't there very long, again, because they were kind of on their own thing. So they weren't with us much longer. It was just kind of like that. We just had, people coming and going based on our circumstances. We had a dog handler, Josh, who was there, and he actually rotated out, and we had a new dog handler come in. And then his dog was actually lost in a firefight. Like, there was a huge explosion ID, and the dog spooked and ran off, and we weren't able to recover him. Camello, he was a wonderful, golden retriever. So, weird shit happens.
You had a golden retriever?
Yeah, he was a bomb dog. We had a multi-purpose canine before that who was a combo. They call them soft multi-purpose canines, where they're combo, sniff, and bite. But the Camello was just a sniff dog, so he would go out and sniff out bombs, IDs, explosives, things like that.
Yeah, we had a lab that did that. I never saw a golden retriever though. It's too nice of a dog to be in a combat zone.
I know he's beautiful. It felt so weird having him there, like having a Belgian Malinois. You're like, okay, you just look like a missile, like the fur missile is, what people would call him, and like that makes sense.
So obviously your deployment was pretty active, and I understand you guys lost a few people on that deployment. What was like? Can you tell us what coming in? What was your mission there? What were you guys trying to do? And then what were some of the difficulties that you were running into?
Yeah, so our mission was to go out to a fire base called Anaconda, which is in the Kasaruzgan district of the Uruzgan province, so kind of south central Afghanistan. And the idea was really just to work alongside and train the local Afghan security forces. So we had like a battalion of Afghan National Army that had an adjacent little compound to ours. And then we had like 90 Afghan security guards that worked for us. They were kind of on our payroll that really did a lot of the heavy lifting and were much more competent than the ANA folks. As well as we had to work with the ANP, the police, and just do what we could to effectively kind of stabilize that district of Afghanistan and try to limit the Taliban's ability to kind of take root or occupy there. And so pretty classic SF mission, like go out, work alongside the locals, collect intelligence, run information operations, run humanitarian assistance operations, conduct reconnaissance, conduct limited direct action, kind of take out targets, etc. And so that was our plan, was to get out there and establish security, pick up on what the last group of guys were doing, and kind of see if we can't push the Taliban further and further back to kind of mostly eradicate them from this big kind of river valley that we were in. And we knew it was not going to be pretty because the previous group that was there for 6 months, 9 of the 12 guys in their ODAs had got Purple Hearts on their deployment. So it was a very active place that was not very safe to go to. And we thought getting there in January, it would be a little bit less active and we would have a chance to kind of establish ourselves and build some white space because the Taliban tended to be less active in the really cold winter months, especially in the mountains.
Yeah.
They just can't. They don't have the capabilities. A lot of them would go south to Pakistan and like kind of refit, and the commanders would do those things. And then as the weather warms up, it kind of becomes the fighting season and things get much more kinetic, typically. So that's what we were kind of planning on doing. And we got there and we spent a few weeks and it basically was going according to plan. We were kind of getting to know everybody. We spent a lot of time with the district governor and the police chief and the ANA commander, and we're started a training program with the ANA soldiers, and we got to know our ASG and played volleyball with them, did all things we could to ingratiate ourselves, kind of got our team solidified, and we went out and ran ops. We actually pulled a few guys off the battlefield right there in the early going when it was cold, because we found that we could sneak right up to people when it was freezing ass cold outside in the middle of the night. That security wasn't very good by the Taliban back then. So it was all really going according to plan, and like we felt like we had a good handle on it, even though it was a tricky situation. We did have a couple of instances, again, in the very early going where we had reports of them trying to kind of mass on the fire base, like maybe try to attack and overrun the fire base in the first few weeks, which is not ideal, obviously.
Yeah. Did that ever come to fruition? Did they ever try to attack the base?
So we had 2 instances. One, when we first got there, where we sort of got wind of it over signal intercept, and we got some aircraft overhead pretty quickly and got up into a defensive posture and were able to sort of put that back before it became much. And then we had another one right before we left, actually, that was, we actually got a couple rounds over the wall. It was kind of in the middle of the night, and it was this weird disorienting thing because it was the middle of the night and we're all getting up, and we basically just ended up getting a few guys on the roof. And I remember one of my guys, Gus, and I were just shooting 40 millimeter grenades out of like Vietnam era thumpers, like those little single shot 40 millimeter grenade launchers.
Hell yeah. And
it got them, kind of scurrying around. I think a lot of times they'll do that just to sort of probe the wire more or less and see if you're vulnerable. But in any case, it was clear that they were still there. It was clear that they were tracking our movements because we'd intercept chatter all the time of them, communicating to one another whenever we would leave the base, or what the security posture of the towers looked like, and all that kind of stuff. So
yeah,
we spent the first month or so just kind of getting out, doing some pretty low-grade operations so that we could get a feel for the terrain and get to meet the people out in the villages and make as many friends as we could, but also establish a more robust security posture to make sure that we had a little bit of space around the fire base at least.
what kind of weapons? I mean, did the enemy have any heavy weapons? Was it still kind of like you saw in Iraq, like rockets and, rudimentary like ways to annoy you kind of, or was it more, I mean, did you feel like it was more thought out, more direct, like, hit and run attacks, stuff like that?
So the weapon systems were not that different. They were similar, improvised explosive devices, RPGs, small arms, AKs, PKM, that kind of thing. But the big difference was the Taliban were just, on average, much more effective.
Yeah.
They were much more deliberate in setting up a complex ambush, much more capable of kind of standing and fighting with you rather than just driving by and spraying some AK rounds in your general direction. A lot of the stuff we saw in Iraq was pretty, hit and run type stuff. They were looking to lob a mortar and get the hell out of there kind of thing. The Taliban were much more rugged. The terrain also favored them in many ways too. They were familiar with it. Tons of choke points, tons of narrow mountain roads, forward sights at rivers, stuff like that. And they knew what they were doing, and they were much more capable in terms of a tactical opponent than anything we saw, at least that I saw in Iraq.
Yeah, it's difficult, and a lot of those guys have been in those mountains fighting since the 80s, They fought the Russians there, and now they're fighting the Americans there, and then it does definitely make it a difficult circumstance. That's what I've always heard, from people that, especially up in those areas where you're talking about when you're talking about near Pakistan and stuff, where it's much easier for like foreign fighters and senior leaders to come across and direct things and dictate things. It can definitely be a little more sketchy. Even, when I was there in 2013, we didn't really have a lot of. There was only a couple times where it felt like they were going to stand and fight, where the Taliban, it wasn't just like a quick hit, or foreign, whoever they were. It wasn't like a quick hit. Most of the time, they wanted it because they didn't want to go toe-to-toe with us because they knew that we'd bring in close air support or something pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Was it like that? I mean, you said they fought better there, but was it kind of the same thing? They knew the power of, close air support, and did they know their limits? Like, we can attack for, maybe 10 minutes and we got to get out of here, or...
Yeah, I think it was essentially like that. So the two big mix-ups that we were involved in out there were similar in the sense that they were coordinated ambushes. They were very different, but they were both coordinated ambushes where we eventually kind of got our wits about us and tried to bring in some air support, and then they were able to kind of melt away, over the backside of the mountains or whatever. But in both cases, it wasn't just a couple guys spraying and then running. It was, 2-3 sides, well-prepared, well-placed shots. They were getting rounds on targets, and they were staying and, really making it hard for us, and would only sort of pull once they heard aircraft overhead or the first rounds hit the side of the mountain or that kind of thing. But in terms of us shooting, M4s and 50 cals and things back at them, they'd stick around for a while and take cover and continue to fight.
So with this ambush, was it IED initiated? Is that what you're saying? The IED initiated ambush and then attack, or how did that go?
One was, one wasn't. So the first one was, we were down kind of the floor of this bit of a valley in a village, and there was high ground on really every side, but certainly on 3 sides, and they had kind of gotten up in the high ground and watched our movement. And as we folded up shop from our operation, we're getting ready to head out, and guys are starting to move back toward the trucks. They initiated an ambush with kind of long-range small arms fire and just were plinking us from different directions, which is terrifying because they're above you and around you, and it's just you can't really see where it's coming from because it's coming from different sides. And rounds, Mark Small got hit initially on the initial volley, and he was killed pretty much instantly, which makes it a whole other mess because then you've got a serious casualty and you're trying to account for that while you're trying to fight your way out of there. But they put a lot of rounds. The trucks had a lot of rounds in them when we got back. Water cans had been hit and ammo cans and different stuff. So I'm not trying to make a crazy war story out of it, but it was terrifying. I mean, they were shooting at us from multiple sides, and we were getting hit, and we were trying to get out of there.
I mean, you don't have
so that was one.
You don't have to make it a terrifying war story. It's just, and this is early on too, right? You guys are still in Humvees at this time.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And the guy you lost, you said Mark Smalls, that was your CCT?
No, Mark was our senior medic.
Okay.
In that exchange, which is another great thing. You get the first guy to go down is your senior medics or junior medics there working on them, and it was a bad situation. The guys acquitted themselves really well. I mean, we did all the things you would expect a team to do, and we managed to get out of there without anybody else getting hurt. But it's obviously a bad day for all the obvious reasons. The other big ambush we were involved in was IED initiated, and that one was super catastrophic because all the guys on that truck, all but one of the guys on that truck, were KIA pretty much instantly. Damn. So you've got a disabled, upside down burning vehicle in the middle of this narrow little road with some of us in front of it and some of us behind it, and a river to our left and a mountain to our right, and we were just stuck like Chuck. And we had, it was, at the risk of being overly graphic, it was just a real mess. We had guys that were KIA that were scattered around the place. We had one guy that was still in the truck. We had a guy that was severely wounded that was thrown clear but was in really bad shape, like severely broken leg, broken back kind of stuff. And we were in a bad spot because they were above us and below us. And we were eventually able to make our way out of that without taking any further casualties, thank goodness. But it was a very big mess of a day. And in that particular instance, they actually came up the bank from below us and were trying to come right up and completely overrun us.
Oh, wow.
Because we had kind of sensitive items and stuff scattered everywhere, and we were just trying to figure out where everyone was at and secure these guys and get them packed up and get them out of there and get a medevac off. So we were pretty vulnerable for way longer than you would want to be. I mean, it went on for a long time before we were able to get out of there. And my teammate David, him and I were moving a casualty, and he kind of dropped the feet and wheeled around and shot a guy that was like trying to come up over the bank and get us from behind. I mean, it was a really, really horrifying, terrifying sort of series of events. And, and again, to be in charge, you're like, what the hell, man? Like, how are we ever going to get out of this?
Yeah.
And, and then you start thinking, like, how am I going to live with this? Because it's one thing, like, right now we got to get out, cross this river and get home without this getting worse. But then you're also like, what's tomorrow going to look like? Because this is completely unprecedented stuff. At least for us, it was, and it's.
Well, yeah, you just lost.
It was very,
four
very
teammates,
difficult.
Right? It was 4 on that one.
Yeah, boom, in the blink of an eye.
Man,
in the blink of an eye, and we have one seriously wounded. So we've got, Mark's off the battlefield on February 12th. He's gone, and we're mourning his loss. And it was literally the day of his funeral. We have 5 more guys off the battlefield, 4 KIA and 1 severely wounded. So you got 6 dudes that are combat ineffective in a matter of a week, a little over a week. That's a huge hit to a small team. Yeah, and especially a team that, like, I think we consider ourselves to be very, very good. Yeah. I mean, we were incredibly close knit. I think we really liked and trusted each other, and confidence was high. And we had no reason not to be confident, right up until that. And honestly, even after Mark was killed, it really shook us. But I think we all kind of felt like we could get back on the horse and kind of dedicate the rest of the deployment to Mark, and we were going to be okay. And then when that happened, it was just like world totally upside down.
What is now in that kind of situation? One, I think it's crazy that you guys got out of there without losing anybody else. You're talking about basically the worst tactical situation you could put yourself in. You got people above you, people below you. You're surrounded, essentially, casualties, sensitive gear everywhere. I mean, what a crazy situation now. I can't imagine what that was like. And it's amazing that you guys got out of something like that, Beyond that, after that happens, you've lost multiple people. At what point does the higher command look down and go, man, this team is hurting right now. Maybe we need to bench them for a while. Or is that even a thing? Or did they just go, hey, they just need to be reinforced with more guys? Like, because there's got to be someone going, hey, the psyche of this team has got to be kind of off right now because they just lost a bunch of people. I mean, how could it not be, right?
Yeah, it was in some ways left up to us, which I don't know if that was a blessing or a curse or if that was fair or unfair. But I give a lot of grace to our higher headquarters because I don't think they really knew what to do either. They clearly were not planning on that happening, and it was tough for them. I write about this a little bit in the one chapter of the book where I share this story. I think that was actually one of the hardest periods of my entire life because, I was obviously hurting as an individual. I was, dying on the inside for all of my guys and their families. I had a wife back home who I'm sure was terrified and pregnant. And really, I needed to advise the higher headquarters on what I thought we needed to do, because they were really good to us in the sense that they kind of said, hey, you're out there, we're not. Talk to me about what's going on. And some folks came out. Our battalion commander and the group commander came out and spent a couple days, and they did see us and talk to us a little bit. But they wanted me to advise them on what I thought the next move was be. And so we sort of thought through our options, and ultimately staying out there just wasn't a good option because some of our guys were pretty rattled. All of us were in one way or another. You know, you all deal with it a bit differently. And, you know, I think everybody did the best they could for sure. We could have just got some more guys sent out, but it just wasn't a good situation for us really to be there, I didn't think. So ultimately, I had to call back to the headquarters and say, hey, I think you should pull us out of here. I mean, not immediately. You know, we can stay and do what we can for a little while and get another team out here maybe, and we can get them spun up. But we probably need to, in the next 30 days or so, punch out of here and go back to Kandahar, go somewhere where we can kind of refit a little bit and get oriented on a different mission set. And so that's what they ultimately did, is they pulled us back off that fire base. Another team came out and replaced us, and we went down to what was called Fob Mahalik or Fob Gecko. It was kind of an interagency base on the north side of Kandahar, where like the OGA guys and stuff were. Mm-hmm. And a team had been there. A team had traditionally been there, but there was no team there on that particular deployment for some reason. So they were like, "This will be great. We'll get you down there. You can occupy that space. You can take your time." And we'll get you some more guys, and you can get kind of back up to speed and run some different missions out of there, which is more or less what we did. And to be honest, the rest of the deployment was okay. I mean, again, we did our best. We went out and ran some ops with some sister teams that needed like a second team. We ran some joint ops with like other ODAs and Navy SEAL platoons and went out and hit bigger targets. And that was cool to get the guys back in the saddle and go out and get on an aircraft and go do that. Mm-hmm. I think some of the guys were not real keen on being out on a wheeled vehicle on a dirt road. You know, that was kind of a thing that was sensitive. So we did a ton of patrols where we would walk off base in the middle of the night and go walk through the hills and perform reconnaissance or patrol through a village. You know, I'm sure I didn't do the best job. I did as best I could to do enough to kind of keep us in the saddle and keep us in the fight, you know, because we were, at the end of the day, we're soldiers and we're at war and we have a mission to do. So, you know, we tried to dutifully stay in that and stay engaged and do some semblance of a mission, you know, where we could. But I also was really sensitive to my guys and their families and not wanting to get somebody else, you know, wounded or killed. And that was heavy. It was very heavy for me. I felt like some of my guys still felt the same way about me, more or less. You know, I felt like some of my guys felt differently about me, you know, by that point of the deployment after having all that calamity. So, you know, it was very lonely and isolating for a while. And I don't think anyone was doing it to me on purpose. I just think I felt very alone having to make these decisions. You know, my team sergeant had been killed, so I didn't have my right-hand man, you know, my battle buddy, to work together on this stuff. I wasn't quite sure what the right thing to do was. It was kind of one of those classic SF things where there wasn't a clear right thing to do. You just kind of had to do the best thing, and there were trade-offs involved. But yeah, the loss of confidence in myself and potentially some of my guys losing confidence in me, and then obviously just losing your people. It was a very difficult, you know, 4 or 5 months to get through the rest of that deployment. But you know, I think we did about as well as we could have done. And again, I'm sure you ask other people, they may have a more harsh critique of my performance there, but certainly was trying our best.
Yeah, I mean, that's all you can do. I mean, these are unprecedented situations that you're in, you know. I mean, and the loneliness of leadership is kind of like you said, no one kind of put you there, but I think it's a natural thing because you are the person that has to make the decision. And as a leader, as an officer, you can't. I mean, it sounds like, you know, a lot of people will be like, well, we'll just ask what everybody wants to do, you know, and go from there. And it's like, that's not really an effective way to be a leader. Yeah, maybe in certain situations, special situations, that might be a case. But a lot of times you're making these decisions based off of what you know and your own kind of gut feelings and stuff like that. And it's a tough spot. And you have to live with those decisions. Had you said, no, we're going to stay here and not leave, and more guys would have gotten killed, I mean, then you would have had to have lived with that decision. So I don't like to play the what if game, what if, because it's like you said, people may look at you differently now after that deployment. And I don't know if that means good or bad, but to me, I'm like, it's hard to, in a situation like that, I couldn't question somebody's decisions. I mean, you're just in such a crazy environment that no one, like I said, unprecedented. I mean, how could anyone question what you're trying to tell them after all these events have occurred,
Yeah, that was certainly not what any of us expected, and not what I thought I was signing myself up for. I think I learned an awful lot. I've had a lot of time now, with 15, 16 years gone by to reflect on it. And, I'm in contact with several guys from the team and have tried to remain close to them. And, I think we've all kind of moved on with our lives in different ways, and most of the guys are doing really well. I mean, it was a great group of guys. But that's just something that not very many people will ever have the chance to go through that kind of thing with a group of people. So it's certainly unique, if nothing else.
Yeah, and that's a good thing. I mean, you don't want people to have that kind of tragedy hit their lives if they don't have to. I mean, man, that's an experience. I don't know. That's such a tough spot to be in. And I completely understand the guys where you're talking about guys that want to get back in vehicles. Man, once you're affected by an IED or whatever, once you see, I mean, those guys, they saw the direct impact of an IED. Of course you don't want to get back in a vehicle. I mean, I remember when I was an advisor in 2013, we watched these guys put an IED in a culvert on the main route we took, 611 through Sangan. Yeah. And because of ROEs and stuff at the time, we couldn't actually strike the guy, so they got away. We sent someone out, got rid of the IED. But we went down that road at least 4 times a week. And every time we went over that culvert after that, I just kind of I braced myself because I'm like, this is a known spot that they could put an IED in. And it's crazy how something that even never really actually affected me. You know what I'm saying? So I can't imagine seeing the actual blast results and all that, and those are your friends. And I mean, yeah, man, there's no way. It's just, I wouldn't want to do it either,
Yeah, checked a lot of culverts the rest of that deployment. I mean, a lot of them personally, because I just was like, I know how folks are feeling, and I'm like not trying to be a hero here, but if I got to hop off the truck and go shine a light in this culvert, like that's what we're gonna do, because it's just too. The cost of missing one is just way too high. Yeah.
That's the weird world of the military in a combat zone. You can't just drive down a road. You got to check culverts for IEDs and stuff. Well, yep. Blayne, this has been a really great conversation. I really enjoyed having you on. I'd like you to take an opportunity now to promote your book and maybe any other sites or anything you want to put out there.
Sure. Thanks, man. So, Brandon and I, who you had on a week or so ago, we have a company called Applied Leadership Partners. We do leadership development and advising for, companies big and small all across the country. So that's kind of our day job. That's what we do. We've learned a lot throughout our careers in the special operations world, but also in the 14, 15 years that we've been working in the business world since then. And so we have a blast doing that. I feel like we're pretty good at it, and we intend to keep doing that for as long as we can. So if anybody's interested in that kind of work, we're at appliedleadershippartners.com. You can kind of find out everything you need to know there. And then our book that came out in February is called Perseverance is Greater Than Endurance. Looks just like that. You can get it anywhere books are sold, Amazon, whatever. You can also go to perseverancebook.com if you want to go to a place that talks a little bit more about the book and has links to all the various places you can buy it. So if you prefer not to buy it on Amazon or whatever, you can go to Books A Million or Barnes & Noble or bookshop.com and those kinds of things. So we're super proud of it. We put 20, 25 years of leadership lessons and all the reps we've had out there in the corporate world into a couple of 100 pages. And I think it's a great resource for really anybody, but certainly if you're a leader going through some hard stuff, if you're trying to navigate through uncertainty, there's a framework and some guardrails that will allow you to understand these concepts, place yourself kind of somewhere along the ridge line, and then take some really high quality action to get you and your team through it. So if anybody's interested in that kind of thing, we definitely recommend they check it out.
That's awesome, Blayne. Well, I really appreciate it. I'll put your website in the show description, so anybody that's watching or listening can check that out. As always, my website is jcramergraphics.com. My Instagram's Former Action Guys and Former Action News. And Blayne, I really enjoyed the conversation. I'd love to have you and Brandon back on another time. So thanks again for doing this.
Yeah, man. Thanks so much for having me on. I really, really appreciate it. Thanks for the conversation.
Yeah, man.